Episode 5 of Obi-Wan Kenobi hits plot point 2 and heads for its season finale and possible series finale. I'm not clear on whether or not this is getting renewed for a second season or more episodes or any of that. The question is, was it any good? And who's qualified to say whether or not something is actually good? In an era where we can listen to anyone's opinion at any time on social media, whose opinions matter most? Do some matter more than others? That is what we are talking about on today's show, both who's got a good opinion, and also I will be breaking down episode 5 of Obi-Wan Kenobi. This will be a spoiler-filled show for episode 5 of Obi-Wan Kenobi. You might want to watch or listen after you have seen that show. Welcome to the Story Geeks show. I'm Jay Sherer, co-writer of Death of a Bounty Hunter and Time Slingers. The full cast audiobook of Death of a Bounty Hunter is available via our website on Audible, audiobooks.com, Downpour, Apple Books. Just about any place you can get an audiobook, you will be able to find Death of a Bounty Hunter there. Support the show by purchasing a copy. Links are in the description. We've been getting really great feedback on it, and I would love to have you experience that. Now, joining me on today's show, frequent guest of the show, Mr. Josh Taylor. How are you, sir?
I mean, I'm basically like the main host of the show now. So.
Yeah, you are. What are we talking about today? Can you lead me through the rest of the show?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay. So give me your thoughts on the amount of times you've heard Kate Bush's Running Up the Hill.
Oh, my gosh.
In the past, month.
Well, okay, so let's just say this. I am going to do a series on Stranger Things season 4 coming up, and season 5, because season 5 is right around the corner, or season 4.2, or whatever the hell they're calling these things.
Or actually, they did get renewed for season 5.
Well, this is the last. Like this last thing is the last season, though, right?
No,
I'm pretty sure. I heard it was the last.
I've heard that they have renewed it again.
Oh my gosh, I have not heard that. I have to go
Netflix has a cash cow. They can't let that go. They're losing.
That's true, especially when they're suffering so much with subscribers. But you haven't seen season 4 yet. We're both doing a rewatch.
I've not. No, I'm currently halfway through season 2.
Yeah, Jessica and I just finished season 2, literally last night. Yeah. So for those of you who listen to the show frequently, Josh Taylor is the leader of Modern Mouse, which is basically a look at culture and society through a Disney lens using the Disney umbrella. So he's talking about all things Disney, including Marvel, Lucasfilm, everything that could possibly be under the Disney umbrella. Mr. Josh Taylor is talking about that, and then trying to define how culture fits in with that as well. You can follow him at Modern Mouse. Josh, what did I miss? Yeah. What did I miss?
No, that was great. I wouldn't consider me a leader, considering it's just me most of the time.
You lead yourself, brother.
I do lead myself.
That's right.
In wayward direction.
Well, one of the reasons I'm having Josh on the show is because we're going to spend the first half of the show. Josh has not seen. So for the first half of the show, don't spoil Josh in the comments if you show up and comment on something on this live show. We are running the show live because Josh has not seen episode 5 of Obi-Wan Kenobi just yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this idea about the fandom and what the fandom looks like today. Josh did a really interesting video that I want to get into a little bit more about the fandom. Then I also want to talk about the takes that the fandom has and some of the words and phrases that they use. We're acting like there are people that are qualified to give their opinion on things that I'm not sure they're qualified to give those opinions on. So we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting show. But then after that, I will get into episode 5 of Kenobi, and we'll cover that. I'll just do that solo. Josh will go watch the show while we're talking about it, and we'll go from there. The first thing I want to start with, 2 things I want to start with really quickly. First of all, a big thank you and shout out to everybody over at Hidden Brain, particularly Tara Boyle. If you listen to the latest Hidden Brain episode, the episode from June 14th, June 13th, maybe I think it was when it actually came out. If you listen to the final minute, you will hear that the unsung heroes for that segment, they have a whole Unsung Heroes podcast that they do, by the way. But the Unsung Heroes that they reference at the very, very end of that podcast, just the final minute, Well, it was me and my wife. we were mentioned because they reached out to us. Tara reached out to us and had a conversation with us about publishing. Because both my wife and I've self-published a bunch, and my wife has helped other people publish through traditional publishers or self-publishing. She's an editor, and that was just really fun to get to talk to them. It's really fun to talk to. The Hidden Brain is one of the top 30 podcasts in the United States, and I believe one of the top 50 podcasts in the world. And just to be able to have them to have a conversation with them, and let me just tell you how generous Tara Boyle was with her time. We talked to them about publishing. And then I said to Tara, would you mind talking to me? I have a full cast audiobook coming out. I'd love to get your opinions on some of how the industry works in regards to podcasting and whether or not this could be sold to a podcasting company at some point in time. And she was amazingly generous with her time, and I just got so much out of it. So I just had to say a huge thank you to everybody over at Hidden Brain for including Jessica and I in that little segment. And then Josh Sherer, we're going to get into before we jump into critique of things and what it means to be a critic. We did get an email. I got an email from Robert McClure. So Robert, thank you for sending me an email. Anybody listening can send me an email at hi@reclamationsociety.com. And if it's as insightful as what Robert sent me, or even far less insightful, I will discuss it on the podcast. So make sure you send me an email about that. So Josh, we'll get into this real quick because this is about a past episode of Kenobi.
Okay.
This is from Robert. These are Robert's words. First of all, I love the podcast. I have really enjoyed the recent Obi-Wan breakdown episodes. Thank you, Robert, for that. He says, I especially appreciate your insight into why reclusive Obi-Wan works and reclusive Luke didn't land for everyone. I think you are mostly right that it just simply was not set up well. I have an additional thought on the matter, however. I feel that Luke's emotional spiral is not as organic as the writers intended it to be. It is not so much a problem of storytelling as it is a problem of psychology. Someone like Luke would not grow cynical towards others having experienced what he did. Rather, Luke Skywalker, given his personality and emotional inclinations, would have certainly become depressed and forlorn, but not cynical. The real Luke Skywalker would have walked past Rey and tried to ignore her, but not take the lightsaber and throw it. He would have reluctantly trained her, but not made fun of her by slapping her hand. His natural declination. I don't know that word that well. You're smarter than me, Robert. His natural declination would have involved more inward repression and less outward aggression. I could be way off, but that is my opinion. Obi-Wan, by the way, was handled very well by his writers. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Robert, for that email. What do you think about that, Josh? Do you agree with Robert that it's not only a problem of storytelling, but also somewhat a problem of the psychology of the character?
I mean, that's an opinion for sure, and I have no problem with that opinion. I think that we all certainly had a different trajectory in mind for a Luke Skywalker, post Return of the Jedi. And years went by, decades went by before we really had an answer. And I'm sure most of us thought we'll never have an answer. So we just made up what we thought he was going to be and become afterwards. I was fine. Listen, I'm a Last Jedi person. I love The Last Jedi. I actually like what they did with Luke Skywalker. I don't have a problem with people saying that they don't like what they did to Luke Skywalker. Because in your mind, you've made this up, and I understand what you're saying about the psychology there. With Obi-Wan being on the same trajectory, I kind of like it. I like Obi-Wan feeling like both Luke Skywalker in a way, and also feeling like the Mandalorian, because it's such a familiar trope. It's like a trope within a trope. I have been honest. I think I've been on this podcast before being honest and saying this, and that I think the best thing Star Wars could do is to ditch all of the legacy characters and do something new. The Mandalorian was a fresh, new thing.
Yeah.
But since we have Obi-Wan Kenobi, I've been enjoying it. And I don't have a problem with either character, Luke or Obi-Wan, kind of feeling the way that they feel.
Yeah. So my take, and just to recap what my take was really quickly that Robert's referring to, is that when you leave Obi-Wan Kenobi in Revenge of the Sith, and when you pick him up again in A New Hope, there is 20 years of time approximately in there, maybe a little less than 20 years. And in that amount of time, the Empire has gained complete control of the galaxy. And if you go all the way back to Revenge of the Sith, that was the turning moment when Palpatine essentially starts to control everything, right? So he goes from being a senator to, by the end of that film, having complete control of the galaxy, or almost complete control. And we can see that he, by the time A New Hope starts, basically controls 95% of the galaxy. That's not an official statistic. That's just my interpretation of what,
Right.
he didn't have all the outer rim and stuff, but he has a lot of it. So in that period of time, Obi-Wan Kenobi has seen the greatest moments of the Jedi Republic and Jedi Council and Republic branching out across the universe, almost the near eradication of the Sith to a degree. Before all of this pops up, they really have control, and it completely flips by the time we get to see him in A New Hope. So my point had been, the last time we saw Obi-Wan, he was watching Anakin burn. Limbless Anakin is burning on Mustafar. And so it's not hard for us to think that there would be a severe emotional trauma to losing his friends, to all of the people around him dying who were Jedi, to his brother, Anakin Skywalker, being severely wounded, if not about to die at his hands. And the thing that he needed to feel. So it's not, so my point was, it's not hard to see a depressed, hiding, fearful Obi-Wan, in my opinion, because we have the building blocks of how he has to get to these different places. Now we do know that he is different than when he starts A New Hope than he is when he starts the Obi-Wan series. So we can tell that there's going to be some sort of development in him through the course of the series. So that's kind of interesting as well. Right. My point with Luke had been that the last time we saw Luke, he was like, I'm off to build, he didn't say this, but he was off to build the Order back. It was like he was off to help. If you stopped watching at Return of the Jedi, you would assume that Luke and Leia would go on to build up the Republic back to what the Republic used to be. Now they've got a long ways to get there because the Empire still controls 95% of the galaxy. It's just they don't have a Death Star, and they don't have an Emperor, and they don't have Vader anymore. So they're severely limited. But, and of course, there's lots of legends that cover that, and there's now even some Disney produced properties that cover some of that time frame. But what's difficult is when you see Luke. First of all, from a storytelling standpoint, you get the crawl in Force Awakens. Then you get a few lines here and there from characters saying, like, Luke, don't worry about Luke, like, blah, 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 blah. Like, he's off and he's doing his thing. So we know that Luke has removed himself from society. So now the question is, when we see him again, why in the world would Luke do something like this, right? And then we see why Luke would do something like that. Because he had built the Jedi Temple. He was training Jedi. His own nephew was having issues and trauma, and he couldn't help his nephew, and he almost killed his nephew. So you go, okay, I could see how. Now what Robert's saying on top of all that. So in other words, let me just make a point in this real quick about what I was saying before we get to Robert's statement. I was just saying there's a lot more that is easy for the brain to fill in when we see Obi-Wan, knowing where Obi-Wan is going to. It's easier for the brain to get there than it is to go, man, the last time I thought of Luke, it would have been like triumphant Luke. We're not getting that. I understand that. My brain can get there because I, like you, actually kind of like what Luke is portrayed as. However, then you just get like, he's off, and then he throws the lightsaber. So what Robert's saying is, and then my question was, is that enough? And I don't think it's quite enough to get everybody onto the same page, right? You can have various opinions on how Luke gets there, and I don't think you're wrong because there's not enough given to us by the storytellers for us to say, well, there's evidence you're wrong, because there's not enough evidence either way. So your brain has to do its own headcanon to get to where you think Luke should be. Now, what Robert's saying is that he can get there from a storytelling standpoint, that Luke has removed himself, But what Robert's saying is it just doesn't feel like the personality of Luke to not find value in all of the things that where Luke learned to value the Force. He's now saying like, nah, screw it all. And I do think that there's two things going on there, I would say, and I'll get your response to this, Josh, because I've been talking for too long. But there's two things going on there. The first is that I think Rian Johnson specifically wanted to be bold in his storytelling. He did not. You can see this throughout the entire through line of The Last Jedi. And this is why I think The Last Jedi is actually, in my opinion, a very good Star Wars film as a standalone film. I think it's really difficult for me to say that it's good as a part of a trilogy because of what it does. But that's not just his fault. That's the collective fault of Lucasfilm. But what he's trying to do is he's trying to be incredibly bold. He's trying to give you surprises that Star Wars usually cannot give you. Why can Star Wars not give you surprises? Because Star Wars has a formula. Star Wars is built on myth. Star Wars is built on the adventurer's journey. By the way, shout out to What the Force podcast for. I didn't realize that Joseph Campbell did not originally call it the hero's journey. He called it the adventurer's journey, and somebody along the way changed the name of it. So the adventurer's journey, I think, is a better name for it. So I'm going to keep using that. The adventurer's journey is what Star Wars is all about. You don't get a lot of surprises with that. You can go look up what that is, and it will give you all the plot points. And I think that what Rian Johnson was saying was, screw the plot points. I'm just going to do all these surprising things. And that I think is great as a standalone film and maybe not great as a part of a Star Wars trilogy, but it is what it is. So what Robert's then saying is, okay, well, what's really difficult for me is to get to a point where you're going to use those surprises without also giving me some context into why would Luke not only remove himself from the Force, but then deride the Force as if it was something not worthy of being learned, right? And I do think that there's a good point to be made there. I think that, sure. And I think it's okay that Rian Johnson broke some of what our expectations were, but these are the consequences of doing something like that. So, Josh, what do you think?
No, you're totally right. I do think that there's a shock and surprise when he throws that lightsaber, right? Yeah. Like, people laughed in the theater, partly because it's a funny moment, but also partly because, like, you're laughing because you're like, oh, I'm so shocked. Like, what else am I supposed
right.
to do here?
Right.
The way that Rian Johnson wrote it does kind of Tarantino the film in the sense that you're starting with a character that's already jaded, and kind of broken, but you don't know how you got there.
Right.
And so it took the rest of the film to fill you in on some of those gaps. Again, like you said, is it enough to, determine that that's where the character was headed? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure. The other thing is, like you said, because of Lucasfilm's lack of foresight to put together the whole trilogy at once and then film it.
Yeah.
Put it all together story-wise, at least. I think that becomes one of its main issues. Could we have seen Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams and whomever else all work together to be able to get to that?
Right.
Or would they have ditched it? We'll never know.
Right.
Because the sequel trilogy is it's a mess. It's just a mess.
Even if you like it, which I have to admit, like, there's a lot of people that that really dislike the sequel trilogy. I don't find myself in that position. I don't ever defend it from a storytelling standpoint because, as you said, it is very, 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 very messy. And I believe that. Go ahead.
When you look at trilogies, there's very few trilogies that are mind-blowingly amazing from the first second to the very end.
True, yeah.
Even like you and I know we're fans of Indiana Jones. And those films. Not every film, at least even in the first three films, right? Like, let's not even talk about Crystal Skull because I know people have their feelings. But even in the first three films, there are moments and films in that trilogy that people don't love because they don't feel like they fit or are cohesive or whatever. A lot of people point to Temple of Doom. Some people love it, some people hate it, and that's fine. I feel like the sequel trilogy is similar in that opinion.
Yeah, and I think the problem is, I mean, like Indiana Jones. Let's face it, like franchise storytelling is still a new vehicle. It's not franchise storytelling. Is not a new vehicle so much in the comics world, right? It's fairly mature in the comics world. But it has come in and out of favor in storytelling over the years. You used to get serial stories in newspapers. That's the version of franchise storytelling.
Radio broadcasts.
Yes, radio broadcasts have been serialized, but the problem is that when you talk about serialized stories that are also become franchises and have different mediums that they're telling stories in, the big problem is, I mean, like what we call a trilogy in the 80s is not what we call a trilogy in the modern day. Indiana Jones does not fit together as a consistent narrative. The second film is a prequel. Like it's like so even so to your point, what the point I'm making is that we have a new expectation of films. Is that the films have to fit together perfectly based on what came before it. We have these things we call canon that we have to refer back to that were previously only referred to in the context of religious studies, so that human beings like you and I could figure out, do we want to trust the material, the source material? And we would ask each other, is this canon? Meaning, have we studied it enough to say that these things could be good enough for us to place spiritual beliefs on, right? And now we're saying that about Star Wars. Like, it's a completely different shift about what we're asking from our storytellers and our storytelling vehicles from them to do. And I think that just makes it a lot more difficult. So but that's a good segue. So let me just say to Robert, thank you for the email, Robert. Fantastic thinking. I like the way that you're thinking about that. Thank you for not being toxic in your thinking and actually bringing forth. Robert did something in his critique that I want to talk to you about in this next segue, Josh, because he did it, I think, a really good job of taking on a principle that I think that we should all try to take on if we're having a discussion about storytelling. But before we get there, I do want to talk a little bit about, because the setup for all of this is there's this level of toxicity in the fandom. And then we start to break that down and we start to say, like, well, what is toxic and what is critique? And toxicity and critique are actually two different things. They're not the same thing. So although they can be the same thing. So they can be synonymous. Sometimes they're not synonymous. It just kind of depends. So you did a video. You attended Star Wars Celebration, which I'm very jealous about. For those of you who don't know, Josh and I kind of switched places, and I now am in Colorado, and Josh is in California, and he got to go to Celebration, which I'm stoked about. And so you did a video about the state of the fandom. It was almost like as if you were doing, the head of Lucasfilm was going to give a State of the Union address, but you're doing that on behalf of Lucasfilm and saying this is the state of the fandom. I highly encourage everybody to go watch that video. I will really try hard to remember to put a link to it down in the description below. But tell me a little bit about what you learned as you created that video about the fandom now.
So I've been under the assumption for a long time. I've always been a more positive than pessimistic kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
And I try and see all viewpoints. I'm the kind of person who, my friends will watch whatever news stories and come to their conclusions. I typically like to watch all sides and then kind of come to a conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, even with the, because this is coming up, so this is topical at the time, like the January 6th hearings that are going on, right? Some of my friends were watching it, and Fox News was the only station that wasn't playing it out of all the news networks. And so I decided to catch a few clips from Fox News just to know what the other side's talking points were. Mm-hmm. Not because I agree with them at all, but I wanted to know, like, okay, what's the message that's going to come from this side so that I can debate it.
Right.
Debate is something that just in general has is not survived into the 21st century. It feels like
Yeah.
the internet age has killed debate. But what I learned, like going to Star Wars Celebration, I was really excited to go. It was a 4-day event this year. They've done like 5-day events in the past,
Hmm.
and there were some really great moments. There were a lot of really cool people that I met, but there were if you stuck around long enough, if you listened in to conversations or you went to some of the panels that were run by fans instead of run by the big Lucasfilm panels that like
Right.
Dave Filoni comes out and etc. There were some moments where it was like, oh, some people's opinions are seeping in,
Ah,
and those opinions are not welcoming to people who have separate opinions. And I found that to just be um, a bit menacing and
ah.
a bit off-putting. And I was
I
like,
mean, the
"Oh,
name of
this
the
is
event is Star Wars Celebration. I mean,
right,
celebration is in the name.
right. We
Yeah.
we should be celebrating everything." And most people were. That's the
Right.
thing.
Right.
Most people were. But I found that like this fandom of kind of toxic takes,
Mm.
and I hate using the word toxic because I feel like it's the same as like any other kind of buzzword that goes around. But like people who have really strong opinions that are not welcoming to other people's
Right.
opinions, and then demean people because of it. You
Right.
see that a lot online,
Right.
and I started to see that seeping into
Mm.
this big convention, this seeping into the real world. And I know it's already part of the real world, but we've seen it before. I reference the video game industry and
Ah,
quite a
yes.
few years ago, how people were streaming on Twitch and YouTube, and they were gaining a loyal following, and especially of young males, a
Hmm.
young male audience. That's typically who's watching Call of Duty players and whatnot.
Hmm.
And when you've got somebody there for an hour watching you and you're talking to them, you have to be captivating. So a lot of these messages of hate were coming through,
Mm.
anti-feminist ideas, white supremacist ideas, and now we're seeing an entire generation of people, a young generation, who have these ideas that are like really hateful, and people are wondering where it came from. And it's like, well, if you looked at this like subsection of fandom,
Mm.
um, nobody noticed them, and
Hmm.
now you're starting to see them, and they're starting to run, um, do their own conventions, plan their own events, do marches, things like that. So it started out as I want to watch somebody playing video games, and it turned into I hate women, right?
Right.
And now I feel kind of similarly with Star Wars. There is a lot, especially misogyny. There's a lot of, oh, I really love Luke Skywalker, laser swords, droids, pew pew, into women have ruined everything I love,
Mm.
and that they are not allowed to like Star Wars. And in my video, I use a bunch of examples of people who are legitimately saying exactly that.
Mm. Mm.
Um, Sexist comments, racist comments, things like that. And that kind of conversation is, to me, unacceptable, especially in a large crowd, like at a convention where, I would say 30%, maybe even more, were women.
Mm.
Um, and so it's difficult to see that kind of thing.
Yeah, so there's this I wrote an article about this on my Medium blog, which I don't update very frequently, but every once in a while I'll write an article for it. And I was writing about it from the perspective of a storyteller because now all voices can be heard. There is increased pressure on storytellers to adapt the stories that they're telling to whatever they're hearing from the voices of the audience, right? Now, why is that the case? Well, it's the case because for those of you who have not ever tried to publish anything before for other people, if you don't publish what people want to read or watch or listen to, then people don't buy it, and then you can't keep publishing it and have that be a sustainable activity for you. Or you could, but it'd be maybe be a hobby instead of a business. And so, therefore, you have to kind of gravitate towards what do people want? How can I meet the needs of the people who want it? And then you're playing this delicate balance of how do I feel about the world? How do I feel the world works versus what do people want for me to put into these stories? You'll notice that tragedies are almost do not appear in modern culture anymore in any sort of pop culture sense. That is not true in in greater history because Shakespeare was a frequent writer of tragedies, and Shakespeare was very popular. Now, granted, Shakespeare did. The art of Shakespeare is that he's not only a phenomenal writer, but he does things that the general audience can understand. Shakespeare puts fart jokes into his scripts, and he does that because he wants to get a rise out of the audience that he is writing to, and he wants then to present them with something that's far deeper and far more meaningful at the same time. So he's playing the game, so to speak. But it's very difficult because my basic takeaway was that we're not actually, in our sharing of opinions, we're not actually trying to come to solid conclusions. And I think this is what you kind of indicate in your video, and we'll talk about this in a second because I want to talk about what forms of critique are better. But we're no longer trying to critique a thing in order to be helpful. So in other words, it used to be that there were film critics, and film critics did what most of us could not do, which is that they would watch all of the movies that would come out, and then they would tell us these movies are better than these movies, and this is what you should go spend your money seeing. Nowadays, what we do is we log on to our favorite social media thing. We log on to our blog, we log on to our Facebook, we log on to our Twitter, we log on to whatever, and we say, what are some of the people whose opinions I tend to like, and what are they telling me I should do with my time? Whether or not that they have any history in film, whether or not they have any understanding of what storytelling is, we're just looking for a shared opinion. Now, that shared opinion has quickly turned into something different because it used to be that it was like, well, I still would want to know what people who share my opinions or don't share my opinions think about something. You and I share a lot of opinions about what makes a good film, so I like your opinions. However, what it's also doing now, on top of that, is it's actually tribe building, and it is a tribe building activity. So what I mean by that is that we are now saying, well, am I part of this tribe? And what is this tribe then saying? So to your point about gamers, right? I'm watching the gamers, and now there's a following of this gamer, and this gamer is now saying things that I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm already a part of this tribe, so is this something I should believe? Now, for you and me, if we joined that tribe and we were watching this gamer guy, we would probably say, no, I know. In fact, I'll debate you on it. Do you want to do a podcast where we debate it? But for a lot of people, they're not trying to enter the sphere of conversation. They're just trying to better understand the world. And we do tend to understand our world through tribes, right? Like that's very common for people to understand their world through tribes. Now, I did not know how common this was. But as a kid growing up, I had this very strange phenomenon. I was homeschooled. I did not go to a public school, did not go to a private school. Literally, me and my brothers in a room with my mom, and she was teaching us things, right? And she would show us tapes and stuff too, as if she didn't know enough about something. But the problem I always had was I played baseball with a bunch of these other kids. And I could tell you immediately, these kids would come into the field. I would be playing baseball with these kids. We'd be in practice together. We'd be hanging out together. And these kids had tribes. I didn't have a tribe because I didn't know what the tribes were. I didn't go to the school. I didn't realize that that's a cool kid, and that's a nerd, and that's a cool kid, and that's a nerd. Oh, and that's a jock, and that's kind of a smart kid. I did not know these things. And so my early experience was like, why don't you get along with this other person? It's like, we just don't get along. Well, why not? I don't know. We just don't hang out. But yet I am hanging out with you, and I'm going to go hang out with them later on in this practice. And it's not weird to me. So the point I'm bringing up here is that tribalism has tended to always be a thing, but it seems to be becoming more and more of a thing that we are looking for people with the same opinion that we have so that we can join a tribe and then feel comfortable in that tribe. And so here's my question. And anybody listening, you can send me an email, hi@reclamationsociety.com. I said that totally incorrectly. hi@reclamationsociety.org. Don't send it to .com or I won't get it. hi@reclamationsociety.org. What do we actually need from critique? As we're talking about film critique, storytelling critique, TV critique, What is it that separates a film critic from a film enthusiast, from a general audience fan, from a person on Twitter who likes to tweet things about something that they watched? What is it that we should be looking for as we call someone a film critic or not a film critic? What do you think about that, Josh? Because I would say that I have a lot of film critic friends. I would include you as one of those people, right? You literally have been paid by other organizations to watch something and then do a write-up about it. I know other film critics, Tim Posada, who's been on the show, Helen O'Hara with Empire, Chris Hewitt with Empire. I haven't had Chris Hayner on the show, but Chris Hayner is a friend of mine who's a film critic as well. All of these people I know are film critics. I want to know why. What makes them a film critic and what makes somebody else an enthusiast or just a general fan tweeting into the void?
Yeah. Okay. So to be a critic, criticism, film criticism is journalism, right? Like you're essentially a journalist. Your goal is one of two things in the modern era. It's either to get somebody to go watch a film or a movie or TV series. If we're just talking about straight film and TV stuff, we can also talk about comics and stuff like that. But to get somebody to go watch it, right? To sell them on it, which is what all these companies love. They would love critics who want to praise something. On the opposite end, be real and say, hey, this wasn't good. Or you're somebody who more often, like what we're seeing now, is not, hey, go watch this thing. It's more kind of like what you do, what I do, what a lot of people do, which is, hey, we both saw this thing. Let me tell you why it works. And also, here are some things that you might not know, etc. Where we go wrong here is that, and this comes from all kinds of sides. So this isn't just like these people that are misogynists are this way, but there's also people on the complete other positive side of it that miss out on this.
Right.
When you're critiquing film or television, let's just stick with that, you are not only critiquing story, but you're also critiquing camera work, film editing, special effects, and how all those things come together. If it's a film like in a Star Wars trilogy, right? Like let's say we're just talking about The Last Jedi, you have to look at The Last Jedi as a movie by itself. It is not, as a critical analysis, it is not a Star Wars movie. It is not attached to anything else. Is this movie good if you knew nothing else about Star Wars? And then you say, okay, is this movie good as a sequel in a series? And those two things have to both come together. Like you can't just have one without the other. A lot of people skip over the thing, like you were saying even earlier, as a singular movie, it is great. If you did not know who Luke Skywalker was, you have no questions.
Right.
As a sequel to a previous film, does it hold up? Well, that's debatable, and people could say no, and that's definitely a valid criticism. Where people decide to go is they focus only on story. And their focus tends to be, especially in this big franchise world, is this what I thought these characters were going to do?
Right.
And if it was, great. This is why I think that's great. If it wasn't what I thought these characters should do, it's bad, and this is why I think it's bad. And there is definitely a place for that kind of thing. But not like that just seems to be the dominant conversation all the time. Is this where I thought this character was going to go? Is this where I thought Luke Skywalker was going to go? Is this where I thought the Harry Potter series was going to go? Whatever the case might be, right?
Yeah.
And that's why sometimes it's really refreshing to see a film that is not connected to a large franchise.
Right.
Because it's like, okay, I just want to be wowed by something, and I don't want to like overthink where it's coming
Yes.
from or whatnot. And there's not a whole community of people that are going to attack this thing because it doesn't match what they thought was going to happen.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So, man, I see a lot of that,
Yeah.
and it's frustrating. And also to kind of what you were saying before, when you write a headline on Medium, your
Yeah.
goal is to catch eyes,
Right.
and the way to do that is to play to people's emotions.
Yes.
A lot of people will tell you that's how you, if you're doing social media, if you're doing YouTube, if you're doing TikToks, if you're doing writing, whatever the case might be. Nowadays, if you play to people's emotions, that's what's going to get clicks. That's why you
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
on your uncle's Facebook some wild articles that he's just decided to repost. Like that is that's people playing to emotion. So instead of saying having a headline that says Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi is not what we thought it was going to be, but it is a nuanced take.
Right.
Instead, you go, Luke Skywalker was ruined by Star Wars. Kathleen Kennedy ruined Luke Skywalker. Then you're like, then people are like, oh my God, I have to click on this.
Right.
And so now you're seeing this polarization because of it. So I think there is a fault to the algorithms of the internet in that way. But then at the same time, we allow ourselves as humans, even knowing that, to still be convinced and click on those things, and either be outraged by one side or outraged by the other side. So
yeah, totally. Now I will say I'm not an expert in what I'm about to say. What I'm about to say is a hypothesis for what got us here and why I think this is happening so much in the modern day. And I'd like to get your reaction to it because I think there's an argument to be made that there is the word toxic. If we were to go look up the definition of the word, means that it is gross and egregious, and it is causing harm to other people. And several people have started talking about the word toxicity as it relates to positive review toxicity, right? And I think that it's not as good of a synonym to use for that kind of commentary. But I do believe that there is an overproduction of positive comments as well. I've even noticed that the Star Wars Twitter account has taken on a very different personality as Star Wars has decided we're going to fight back against this toxicity and negativity I actually think that's a bad move. I think it's actually just feeding things that exist as opposed to pulling things away and not allowing those things to become by doing that. I think you just basically say, yeah, we're choosing a tribe and it's this one, and we're choosing not that tribe. And I just don't think we should do that. But that aside, here's how I think we got here. I have been a part of tech startups that are for profit, that are just about making money. I've been a part of academic environments, which are attempting to produce better educated people, right? People that with hopefully a higher propensity for doing something. And those two environments used to work because the things have changed in very different ways, right? Let me just explain what I mean by that. In academia, the historic interplay between academia and the marketplace was that academia was based on the review of your peers, people who had studied something already, who then said, have you studied it well? And if so, and if your thinking and your activity has showcased that there are best practices that you have put in place, then we will award you with success. You get to have a doctorate. You get to have a master's degree. You get to have whatever. And that's the academic stratification, meaning that it is merit based, but the decision about whether or not the merit is worthwhile is not based on general marketplace factors, but rather based on a set of peers who you would call experts in their field. That is very different from my experience in the startup world. In the startup world, the end goal is to get the target audience to purchase something. It is to get them. So you don't need to be the best you don't need to be the best to make a lot of money. In fact, most times the best don't make the most money. Other people make the most money. And so you have to be good enough, but you have to be good enough in the way people want you to be good enough. Now, where do these things come in conflict with one another? Well, in academia, if you and I are choosing who's good, we tend to look for people who are like us, right? And so we tend to look at, or if they're not like us, then they at least have a shared agreement about what the standards are that we should be using. And so we tend to look for things that probably don't rock the boat so much, or they tend to augment current thinking as opposed to like just wiping the slate clean and starting from scratch. Every once in a while, academia has a breakthrough where that happens, but that is less likely to happen in academia because the rigor that goes into earning the respect of your peers is such that the value of being a peer exists there. That is not true at all in the startup community. In the startup community, you don't get chosen by your peers. You get chosen because you got someone to buy something. And then that's what it is. You got someone to use a tool. You got someone to use. The academia may not even select the same people to win that the general audience picks to win by buying their products and services, right? It's a very different way of achieving something that you would call success, right? One is the general public thinks it's awesome. One is the peers think you're awesome. Why am I even talking about this at all? Because I think it is observationally interesting to apply this thinking to the structures that exist that make us watch TV, invest in stories, go back to the table. It used to be that, and by the way, academia has suffered greatly by not paying attention to the general audience, and tech is suffering greatly in the harm it's doing to society by not paying attention to the best practices. So both things both things are suffering greatly in the world and need some sort of adjustment to get us back into the good graces of having a better society. But that aside, I think that what we've done is so startups can be compared, and I don't want to make this comparison because again, I'm not an expert in politics or political structures, but I'm just going to use the comparison just to have terms to use to discuss this. Startups function almost like a pure democracy. Whatever most people vote for is whatever wins. Academia focuses more like a republic, or even in extreme cases, what you might call an oligarchical structure, which is to say that the oligarchy or the republic, the people that were voted into those places by their peers usually, which is why it's a little different and more like an oligarchy, are the ones who decide that something is good. And my opinion is what we have seen over the last 20 years is the degradation of what was the oligarchy in terms of this is how films get made. This is who talks about films. This is who should be involved in filmmaking and who shouldn't be involved in filmmaking. And then there's like basically, half a dozen to a dozen critics who get the chance to say whether or not that's true or false. And we've seen that system devolve into, well, now everybody has a voice. Now I need to go make films for these people. And so that industry has basically been shifted drastically. And I think that we need an adjustment, just like we need in academia, just like we need, again, I'm not an expert in these things, but just what I'm seeing from what I'm seeing in tech, we need a melding of the two sources. And so here's my conclusion. sorry for this long-winded argument, but I feel like if I don't express it all, then it's hard to get to the conclusion I have. I feel like what we need to identify is the difference between a film critic and a general audience, just like you see on Rotten Tomatoes or Metacritic. Like you see the difference in the ratings between the two, because I think that the general audience is relying upon too many other people to build tribes as opposed to understand whether or not the film was any good. And let me tell you what I think, Josh, we should say a film critic is versus a general audience person. One, it's someone who studies the art. Because you can be a Star Wars fan, study Star Wars, but that doesn't mean you're also a fantastic filmmaker. It doesn't mean you're a good director or a cinematographer or an actor or a writer. There's the Star Wars fan. Their opinion is valid from being the opinion of a Star Wars fan. But a film critic, a TV critic, a critic that we look at to say, what is the value in this piece? And should I engage in it or not from the value that it produces to society at large, to the bigger community, not just to the Star Wars community. And that person has to be involved in an understanding of the creation of the material so that they can be seen as not just another person with another idea who's building a following, but a person who has studied the material to have a conclusion that is worth us paying attention to. I think that you said this earlier on, and I think this is right on, 100%. A critic needs to answer why questions, whereas a general audience person does not. So a general audience person can say, I dislike, and I'm done with it. A film critic needs to say, this is great, and here's why. This scene was surprising. This scene produced this emotion. This actor did these techniques. This director did this, and I've never seen it before. And they did this, and it was surprising to me. Or they did this, and it didn't really work because of this and this and this. So I'll stop there. That was a long explanation of what I think has been happening. What do you think? Am I on the right track here? Are we and are we talking about film critics in a way that is more valuable, or am I totally off base?
No, here's the thing. You are correct. Right?
Thank you.
I think that being a critic should have some prestige that goes with it, right? Like you've studied this, you're knowledgeable about it, you've put the time in, and that's not like, I think you're right in the sense like, okay, you could go to school for film, or maybe you've worked on a film before,
right,
or whatever the case might be. There are other people who come out that are, like these prodigies that just are like, oh, they're really good at this for some reason. Yeah. Whatever the case might be. But here's the problem with all of that. How do I, as a regular citizen of the world, determine when I go online and I click onto YouTube and I type in Jurassic World Dominion, right?
Yeah.
Jurassic World Dominion review. Review would give me the idea that I'm going to get a critical review.
Right.
But the amount of search results that I'm going to get for Jurassic World Dominion review is going to be so many.
Yes.
How do I, as a regular citizen, without having clicked on anything, determine who's going to give me a critical point of view and who's going to give me their general audience analysis? The thing is, I'm still, again, going back to this idea that we respond to strong emotions. Probably the top result of that search is going to be a person who's going to say, I really love Jurassic World Dominion, or this was legitimately the worst film ever made by humanity. How dare you? Right. That's just what's going to pop up, because it's going to get the most views because it's appealing to strong emotions.
Right.
And so that becomes a difficult thing. It's like Spotify, right? Spotify is the same thing. Now that we've allowed the structures of who gets in to go away, right? We've got, like, if you were a musician, you had to be on a record label. That record label got you onto the radio.
Yeah.
From the radio, then you started playing bigger crowds, and you became a big, giant band and a rock star. And now you don't need a record label. You don't need any of that. You can make this music and upload it directly to Spotify. And then Spotify starts paying you. And if you can market yourself really well, if you're the Lil Nas X of the world and you can market yourself really well, doesn't matter what you sound like.
Right.
You can be a star. And so that's the same thing with criticism for film and television. If you can market yourself well enough, if you can get to people's strong emotions, you can be a quote unquote critic.
Yeah.
Because you're the one that's getting paid attention to the most.
Yep.
And that has kind of become what has happened with everything, with not just with Star Wars, but with everything. I'm constantly seeing. You and I are both frequent Disneyland people, at least when we lived here, and we both like theme parks. And there's even in the theme park world, a huge push right now towards the negativity. And anytime I see a video that's strongly emotional on the negative side, it has more views and more streams and more anything. And that also tends to be just in general too. Negativity is a stronger emotion than positivity. And people like to be appealed to know that, oh, they thought this sucked, like I did too. So yeah, there's a lot of negativity, and that negativity then turns into shifts the blame onto other things, right? So with Star Wars, the blame starts to be shifted onto, well, I don't like the sequels. The star of that film is Daisy Ridley. I hate Daisy Ridley.
Right.
You know, or they made this mistake with Luke Skywalker. Rian Johnson wrote him wrong. I hate Rian Johnson.
Right.
And it devolves into that.
Right.
And that becomes the problem. So like we're in a situation right now where how do we determine who's a critic and who's not? And like you were saying too, so when Star Wars came out and made a statement, right, that they were anti-racist, that they don't want racists around.
Yeah.
What they did in an analogy is they walked up to a bully and they punched the bully right in the face. Anytime I've ever going back to my days of elementary school, punching a bully never made the bully not be a bully. You know what I mean? Like he was like, you know what? I've been an asshole this whole time. You were right.
I didn't see it until I got your fist in my face, and then I see it.
Right. Yeah. So I think the way in my video, kind of, I come to the conclusion that like there are less bullies than we think.
Yes.
We've just given them all the platforms.
Yes.
And so the best thing is like in a big convention like that, where 95 or more % of the audience there is super cool. We should, all band together and be like, hey, like, we don't appreciate this version of your critique. I'm no longer going to give you the attention that you deserve, that you're saying that you deserve. And that's going to take a lot of training. That's going to take a lot of people being consciously aware of when they click on, they type in Jurassic World Dominion on YouTube, and that first thing says, I really hate Jurassic World Dominion, here's why.
Yeah. It's
going to take a lot of people consciously going, I don't want to hear this.
Yes.
I'm not going to click on it.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's completely possible right now. Maybe in the future, but not right now.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, because like even when I was talking, if you heard me say that academia was better than the startup world or vice versa, I don't believe that those things are accurate. I believe that certain things are needed at certain times, right? Like sometimes we need the marketplace to win in the tech startup world where it's like the people demand it. And then sometimes we need the marketplace to win where it says like the best thinkers say, or the people we believe to be the best thinkers because they've studied something a lot, they say we should probably do this, right? And the problem is that we constantly see one of those two things go out of whack, right? We saw it with the pandemic, where it was like the people that we expected to know the most about something started silencing people who also knew a lot about something, but they didn't like their take. And so they said, you need to be silenced. But then we saw the general public decide, well, we're either going to believe in masks or we're not. And that's all there is to it. And so we have this, I think what I would encourage people to do is think through why you're following a person. I know this is difficult because you're being asked to think about a lot of things constantly, all the time. But think through why you're following a person and whether or not that critique is valid. So you shouldn't follow me to talk about whether or not somebody's a good cinematographer. I might give you my opinion on whether or not I like the cinematography, but I don't know anything about cinematography, so to speak. I mean, I've studied it as much as a storyteller who likes film has studied it. What I'm trying to do is when I critique something, and this is kind of we'll end on this point, and I'll let you go because I still got to talk Kenobi. But when I critique something, what I am trying to do is from a storyteller's standpoint. I'm a writer. I have directed things as well. I am trying to understand what about something moved me, what about something made me think differently, what about something engaged me in a story, and then ultimately, what was the meaning of that piece for society, and was that true or not true? Was it something that a story we should be telling each other, or was it a story that if we told each other that story enough, we would actually be deceiving one another and believing things we shouldn't believe? That is my goal as a storyteller. It is my goal as a person who converses with other people. Obviously, that makes it easy for me to have conversations with film critics because film critics are doing similar things. They're deconstructing movies in similar ways, but I have a different purpose. I would never want to be known as a film critic. If somebody came to me and said, "You're such a great film critic," I'd be like, "I don't want to be known as a film critic. I guess not what I'm trying to achieve." I'm trying to understand stories at the maximum level that a human being could possibly understand them so that I can go write my own and have them be meaningful to a group of people. And so I can't stand it when I start to hear people who are not only not film critics, but definitely general audience kinds of people who start to say things like the acting is bad, the writing is bad. That to me is a very, very, very ignorant statement coming out of 9.5 out of 10 people's mouths. And the reason for that is because let's just say I heard a critique of Kenobi that the writing was bad. The writing's bad. Okay. First of all, the process for creating Kenobi is that there is a group of writers that writes something. And the bigger the film studio, the more likely this is to be true. They then hand it over to the producers who then say, "Thank you for writing this. We like it a lot." Who then hand it to a director and say, and sometimes the director is involved a little bit more upfront. Like, for example, Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau were given more control, so they wrote things. I do not know whether that's true with Deborah Chow, but I kind of doubt it based on the way that this has played out. I think she's more of a coming in to technically tell the story as opposed to tell the story from the ground up.
She has writing credits, just not on this show.
She has writing credits in previous previous things. Yeah,
but not on Kenobi. Yeah.
Not on Kenobi. Yeah, that makes tons of sense to me. That makes tons of sense. So that's actually helpful in this discussion because it's different than what we're seeing from Favreau and Filoni. And what that means is that she is then taking on something that somebody else put together, but she has the right to change it. If something's not working correctly, if it doesn't fit into the filming schedule, if they don't have the budget to do the way that it was written, she is the director, which means she will change it. You also have a cinematographer who comes in. You also have actors who come in. You also have second units that come in that aren't even being managed by Deborah Chow, yes, but from a leadership standpoint, not from an actively doing it standpoint. So you have a giant crew of people doing a lot of different things, and then someone sees a finished episode and goes, "The writing's horrible." And you go, there's any one thing that could have been changed. So for you to say that the writing is bad is you basically being ignorant of the process about how things are made. So thanks for your comment, but you're an idiot, right? Like, so I think that, and that's true of whether it's acting, like you don't know what the actor was asked to do in that moment. You can't say that the actor wasn't asked to do it differently. I can guarantee you that George Lucas asked, and there's some spoilers that I'm going to get. I'll make the connection when I start talking about episode 5. But Josh hasn't seen that yet, so I'm not going to spoil it for him.
Don't do it.
I can guarantee you that George Lucas, when he's directing Ewan McGregor, told him different things than Deborah Chow told him. Right? I can guarantee you that right now, and I think it's obvious when you watch it. So my point is that if you hear anybody who has a YouTube channel that has not acted before, has not written something before, has not tried to do their own movie before, maybe don't pay attention to when they start to criticize a specific part of a thing. Yes, their opinion is valid. Whether or not they like it or not is okay for them to express. But as soon as they start saying, like, this person's a terrible actor, this person's a terrible writer, this person doesn't know how to direct, that is completely ludicrous. Unless there is one caveat I'm going to make here. They are a film critic who has lots and lots of time being a film critic, or they are a storyteller. They're a former director. They're a former actor. And they say something like, these are some takes that I would have done it differently. And here's why. Because that at least gives you some insight into the fact that they know what they're talking about. Because otherwise, these people have no clue. So anyways, I don't mean to rant too much, but that's when the toxicity of the fan bases gets the worst, because that's when you start to see them bullying actors, you start to see them bullying writers, you start to see them picking sides that they know nothing about, and they don't know what went into that. They don't know how that was done. It happened to Hayden Christensen. It happened to Jake Lloyd. It happened to Kelly Marie Tran. It has now happened to Moses Ingram. Come on. These people are not making the decisions you think that they're making. Like, this is so ludicrous for you to even say that they are, because it just shows that you're a completely ignorant person. So now that I've said that, maybe you can respond to it.
No, that's true. You're going after an actor because you don't like the portrayal.
Yeah.
If you look at Jake Lloyd, right? Like, he was, I don't know how old he was, 10, 12. Same with Vivian Blair, who's playing young Leia on Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? Little kid. They're probably really excited to just be in a Star Wars film or show or whatever, right? Like, they have no jurisdiction over the dialogue.
No.
Because it's already written for them.
Correct.
They have no jurisdiction on how they wanted it to be acted out. Like, a bunch of films and television get several takes of every scene.
Correct.
It's up to the editor and the director then to choose what version of that scene works best.
That's correct.
So when you go, the acting is really stiff. Okay, well, that one shot of that actor is really stiff. There are maybe 10 different shots. Maybe that was the best one. Maybe it's not.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just the editor that chose the worst one.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, it is like you were saying, it's a conglomerate of people all working on this thing.
Correct.
So to go to one actor and go, you ruined it. No, they didn't.
That's right.
They did a job. And I think that's difficult for people to understand, that it is a job that people do.
Yeah.
And when you look at a film and it says at the end credits, it says, like, directed by Deborah Chow.
Yeah.
You have to realize her job as director is to not write the whole thing.
Right.
Again, there have been people that have written, directed, produced.
Yes.
They're all everything. But it is not their job to shoot all the cameras. It's not their job to choose every single point of edits.
Yeah.
Or whatever the special effects are, or the Foley work, or whatever. Like, it's so weird that we go, like, yeah, you're saying, like, oh, the writing's bad. Okay, but, like, why? Right. You can't just say, I don't like Daisy Ridley because she's a Mary Sue. Okay, well, Rey is a Mary Sue, but, like, Luke is pretty similar.
Yeah.
So, like, why is she a Mary Sue, and why would you say that Luke isn't? And like, people sometimes get tripped at that point because they don't think that far through in their critique.
Correct.
They just see something and they have an opinion, and that opinion is I like or don't like something. Yeah, it's really hard. It's hard to see the end of the road on that kind of thing. But I think that taking these voices that have a strong opinion and then use that strong opinion to attack someone.
Yes.
I think that trying to ignore it would be foolish.
Yes.
But at the same time, we also need to not give those people the spotlight as often.
Totally. Totally agree. And I'll give you an example because you brought an example of something specific you brought up. So we were working on Death of a Bounty Hunter, full cast audiobook, and just to show you how chaotic production is, the first time we ever did our production, it was people sitting around the same table, using different microphones, but sitting around the same table, and me directing them. And then what we realized was that we weren't getting as good of audio quality as we would have liked. So then we started recording people because we don't have the resources to have like a giant booth where they all have their own very specific high quality mics. Because we don't have enough of them, we said, let's record one person at a time. And so we started recording one person at a time. Well, we had already listened to one of our actors perform a scene, did a fantastic job. Now we're working with my really good friend of mine, Megan Salinas, who talked to me about episode 1 on this very series about Kenobi. And as we're having Megan do the takes, one of the things that Nathan and I decided as director and basically assistant director was that we would have her start to remove emotion from her takes, right? So the character you're playing, Megan, is up against a character who is experiencing a lot of emotion. And in our opinion, in order for you to showcase that you have power in this scenario, and by the way, this is a female character interacting with a male character too. So this is an assumption that the male character is super aggressive. So how would a female show aggression back? How would a female combat that aggression? And we said, you know what? She's so powerful that no matter what kind of emotion that he shows her, she's not going to be reactionary to it. And so we had Megan keep removing the emotion from that performance because that showcased, I'm not scared of you. This is just what it is. You can rant about it as much as you want to. I'm not dealing with you this way. Now, that was our take on that, meaning that Megan was like, I kind of like the other takes. And we said, well, we kind of like these takes. So we'll do both, and then we'll see which one fits better in the final product, right? That is a very clear definition about how it actually goes down, right? Megan has a take that she brings to the table. We say, Megan, we love you. We love your performance. This is great. It's not worse than another performance you did, but we don't think it works as well in this particular scene because of what we know, because you're not interacting with a person across the table anymore. You're interacting with just us in a room who we have heard the other person's performance. So again, this is going back to a give and take between the director, I'm in this case, the writer as well, and Nathan's a co-writer, the director, the assistant director, the co-writer, and the co-writers talking to an actress about how to perform a thing. If anyone were to come by and be like, Megan's performance is horrible, I'd be like, you're an idiot. I'm the one that told her what to do. You got to blame me if you're going to blame anybody. By the way, I wrote the dialogue. So if you didn't like that either, guess whose fault that is? Like, so it's just ridiculous to me. And I think that's I can give you the specific example from my life that is what you just said, right? Like, this is what it is. So I will say that I think your video on this was fantastic. I will, again, I'll try and link to it. Maybe if I don't, you can remind me. If you haven't seen Josh's video about it, please go watch it on his channel, Modern Mouse on YouTube. And what else are you up to, Josh? Tell the people where they can find you and what they should be watching from you.
Well, what I'm working on is a lot of stuff. It feels like I've actually got a video that I would like to get out hopefully soon. I'm doing a whole 10 years later series. So this episode's coming out in 2022. So I'm kind of looking back on things that came out in 2012.
Nice.
And one of the things that we both love came out in 2012, which is Gravity Falls. And so I'm excited to kind of dive into the history of Gravity Falls and 10 years later, how it may have changed animation and television.
Awesome.
And so that'll be a video coming from me sometime soon. I've got like a couple other historical, more history-based videos, less analysis coming.
Okay.
One about a woman one of the first female animators from Disney. She didn't just work in the ink and paint department. She actually graduated to being a part of the animation team. I was only there for 2 years or so before leaving. But her story is both triumphant and tragic. So I want to tell her story
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm super excited about that. I've got a new podcast that hopefully will be out by the end of the month for Modern Mouse as well. So you can look me up on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Perfect.
And then I also talk, if you're interested in theme park conversations, I talk with my friends over at Theme Park Pulse on their podcast quite often. And we talk about what's going on in the world of theme parks.
That's awesome. Go follow Josh. Check it out at Modern Mouse Josh on Twitter. And yeah, great video. So thank you for doing that. Thanks for joining me. And I'm going to jump into Kenobi episode 5. And I don't want to spoil Josh. So Josh is going to take off. And I'm going to continue that conversation. Thanks for listening to me rant about supposed film critics and helping join in with that figuring out what we should be looking for and why we should be looking for it. I appreciate you, Josh.
No problem. Thank you, sir.
All right. Take it easy, man.
Kenobi. Take it easy.
See ya. All right. So let's get into Obi-Wan Kenobi now, because that was fun to talk to Josh about that. But I also want to get into a little bit more about episode 5 of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Again, that was a long conversation. So spoiler warning, if you haven't seen Obi-Wan Kenobi episode 5, this is going to contain spoilers for that. And I'm going to start right in with the spoilers because I'm going to give a recap of the show really quick here. It starts out with Reva and Vader are able to track these early rebellion fighters back to Jabim. So I'm talking about Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm talking about Tala. I'm talking about his name, Rakim, I think his name is. They are all headed back to Jabim as part of the path where they put Force-sensitive people or people who disagree with the Empire. They ship them off to different areas. That's all happening through Jabim, and Vader and Reva figure that out. As this plays out in real time, we're also getting flashbacks of a very cool scene, where Obi-Wan Kenobi, younger Obi-Wan Kenobi, prequel era Obi-Wan Kenobi, and prequel era Anakin are fighting, and we get to see finally Hayden Christensen without the Vader stuff on. Most of the time, he's not in the Vader stuff, I don't think, anyway. So that was really, really, really cool to see. It really felt to me like a very redemptive moment for Hayden Christensen as an actor to be experiencing Star Wars in a different context. And I really enjoyed seeing those flashbacks. And I'll get into why in a minute. But that fight scene is essentially a metaphor for the strengths and the weaknesses of both characters, both Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. And that's going to play itself out by being showcased in the actual action in the present day of this series as they go throughout the rest of the moments here. So as this plays out, basically what occurs is and you guys saw it, so you would know, Vader and Reva create a sort of siege. They go into the hideout of the early rebellion. They're not calling themselves rebellion yet, but they basically are the rebellion. And there's a bunch of moments that are included in this siege. There's not like a lot going on here. It's that there's where the rebels are. We got to take it over. But what occurs in all of the moments here is a lot. We have Obi-Wan realizing that Reva is a youngling, or was a youngling, and watched Vader kill, or Anakin at that point in time, kill all the other younglings. So that's a huge moment. Reva's motivation becomes exceedingly clear. It's for the first time, and that is she really just wants revenge on Vader, which does present her still as a dark side person, but also presents her in a very different light, because she's not actually trying to become Grand Inquisitor so much as she's just trying to kill Vader and get revenge on Vader, which I thought was a really interesting thing for them to bring into light. Obi-Wan is consistently gaining a lot of his abilities back. We see him, again, being better with his lightsaber, being more skilled with the Force and how he uses the Force. Tala sacrifices herself to buy time by blowing herself up with a thermal detonator. Vader force grabs the ship. It's the wrong ship. The other ship takes off. I am kind of curious to know who was in the first ship and flying the first ship, if it was a droid or something. That would be interesting. There's a Reva and Vader fight, obviously, that does not end well for Reva. And then Reva also finds the message from Bail Organa and knows that Obi-Wan is going back to Tatooine at some point in time. And that, of course, is big problem number one, because that's where Luke is, and we all know how important Luke is here. So on a scale of 1 to 10, this was my favorite episode of Obi-Wan Kenobi, the series. I even liked it probably a little bit better than the first episode, although those would be the top 2 for me. I think most people say that the first episode is their favorite episode. this episode just had a lot of fan service, but it also had a lot of heart. So I love moments where there are consequences for people's actions. The fact that Tala uses the thermal detonator is an emotional moment. It's a great moment. It is a moment that I will enjoy watching over and over again. The confrontation between Reva and Vader is really fun because I don't think we've ever seen Vader fight in that way without a lightsaber before. And then he's able to use a lightsaber at other moments. Really enjoyed the moment where we got to see Obi-Wan and Anakin fighting. But even more so than that, I loved it as a metaphor for their relationship and about how Obi-Wan would manipulate him in the present moment in this time. And the fact that Anakin has not adjusted to some of his more irrational behaviors is just part of his desire with the dark side to make his way happen as opposed to submit to the greater will of the Force. So I think that a lot of that stuff was done really well. It was one of the first episodes where I found myself getting, goosebumps because there were such great moments, not just to see the fan service moments, but also to see some of the cool things that happened as well. I'm always a little nervous when, Vader has the power to grab a ship, and then you kind of just wonder, like, well, why didn't he grab the Millennium Falcon when it was leaving the Death Star after he killed Obi-Wan Kenobi in A New Hope? Why wouldn't he just grab the the Millennium Falcon and pull it back in? Those are things that, every time you add power to a character, it's awesome. But at the same time, it also calls into question, like, well, why didn't the characters use some of those powers earlier on or whenever? So I will say, was there anything that didn't work? I do think there's one thing that I'm not going to pass judgment on until episode 6, until the finale is over. By the way, Michael Young from Nerd Soul had the idea that we should invite all the people that I've had on to talk about this series to talk about episode 6 next week. So stay tuned for that, because I'm going to try to see if I can get as many of them as possible to join me to kind of have a big breakdown episode. It'll be really fun. Come hang out with us on that. The thing that didn't work for me, and the thing that I'm nervous about, there are rumors that we're going to get a Reva spin-off series. I don't think that's a good idea. If I were involved in Lucasfilm, I would say, you know what? I don't know that that's a path that we should go down. Again, it's another character who's in the same Skywalker era. I think I would have rather seen Moses Ingram in a completely different role. I think actually Moses Ingram would be fantastic as a Jedi. I think she would do amazing as a Jedi. We finally got to see an emotion from her that wasn't pure anger in this episode, and she delivered on that really, really well. I think that she can capture a lot of those moments that are more conflicted from a Jedi perspective than from a Sith perspective, which is a Sith is always almost more one note by definition anyways. I think Moses is capable of doing things that are far more sophisticated than that, and I would like to see her in a different context. But I don't think we need that series. That series doesn't make sense to me. But the conflict I'm having, the internal conflict I'm having, it's really the only thing about this episode that besides the Vader pulling the thing, which creates other issues, but again, it's cool. The only thing I'll would say is from a storytelling standpoint is that if they try to shove in a turn to the light side, which I do not think that they will do. This episode was written by Andrew, I believe his name's Andrew Stanton. I believe he's one of the Pixar writers, and so he has a depth of storytelling knowledge that's really solid. So in his hands, I think that this is going to be a really good finale. And this episode was, I thought, great too, and it contained emotional moments that we maybe didn't get some of the other. Well, we did get some emotional moments, but some different kinds of emotional moments, like the Tala death. I thought was really good. So I'm confident that Andrew Stanton will give us a really solid finale. However, what I don't want to see is Reva turn to the light side and have a different objective, or turn to the dark side and have a different objective. That to me is not worthy of being explored. I love the fact that we learned that her main goal is just to get revenge on Darth Vader. And if that's what her main goal is, and if she's using the dark side to do that, I don't need to see her have a redemption arc. Yes, is that Star Wars? That's very Star Wars. Redemption arcs are very Star Wars. Is that what I would want from this particular character? Not really. Will they make it happen? Will they make it work? Maybe, but I'm nervous about that. it doesn't work for me as well as I thought it might have worked. But one of the things I did want to talk about from a writing perspective is that we have now reached, in a 6-part episode series, we've reached plot point 2. Plot point 2 basically takes everything towards its conclusion, and plot point 2 is basically the Riva figuring out that Obi-Wan is going back to Tatooine. That raises the stakes an unbelievable amount, because we know that Luke is back on Tatooine. The last shot of the episode is the shot of Luke, and we know that Obi-Wan's entire goal was to protect the twins, Leia and Luke, and specifically more so Luke. And so now we're going to get this really intense, Vader can't figure that out. And I still think that there's some things left with Leia. We didn't get a lot of Leia in this episode. The Leia that we did get was good, but we didn't get a lot of Leia in this episode. I loved seeing Haja, that's played by why can't I think of the guy's name? The guy from Silicon Valley, the guy I really like. Kumail. I don't know why I forgot his name. Blanking on his name, but love seeing Kumail. He's really funny. I enjoy it. It's an odd humor to include in Star Wars, but I love it. So yeah, I think this was a really, really solid episode. I liked it a lot. I don't think it's going to make me think that this series is better than either of the 2 seasons we got of The Mandalorian, but I do think that this series is better than Book of Boba Fett. And so that's kind of where it sits in my analysis of these things in terms of my personal opinion. And again, my personal opinion, as I said in the beginning of the show, is just for you and I to talk about. It's not for you to I'd rather go and dig deeper into the storytelling. So let me do that a little bit more. Plot point 2 then is them figuring that out, which then says this is going to conclude either on Tatooine or the prevention of them getting to Tatooine, which I think is a really good way of raising the stakes for this final episode. What will happen with Riva? Will she turn to the light side? Will she just try to get revenge on Vader in some way, shape, or form? Don't know. We do know that the Grand Inquisitor, who was the previous Grand Inquisitor before Riva, did not die. We did see that again, so that was not a canon problem that we had. I still think Leia is going to get a memory wipe of some kind at some point in time, so I think a lot of people are going to need that, because they're going to need to say, if you know that Luke is on Tatooine, if you know that Obi-Wan is on Tatooine, that cannot go anywhere. That cannot exist in this universe, because then Vader will know, and then Vader will do what Vader does. So, and what he's been doing already. So I think that that's basically the conclusion that we're going to get, is how do we get so that people don't know that this is true, that Luke is on Tatooine and that Obi-Wan is on Tatooine, which would be really fun. And so plot point 2 is the thing, that moment that rushes us towards the resolution of this particular series. And the resolution of this particular series, in my opinion, has to be around not letting people know that Luke and Obi-Wan are going to have a long-term presence on Tatooine, because that would just basically ruin everything for their secrecy. So yeah, we'll see. I like this episode a lot. I would probably give it, on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say I'd probably give it a 9. I might even be able to, after a second or third viewing, give it a little bit higher than that. I have only viewed it the one time, because when I'm doing a show on Monday morning, it's harder for me to turn around and watch it a couple times. So I did watch it one time. I'm excited to watch it again. I hope that you're excited to watch it again as well. Give me any thoughts that you had about any of this stuff. Write me an email at hi@reclamationsociety.com. Please go support Josh and all of his content. As for my own content, I'd love for you to read or listen to Death of a Bounty Hunter. If you're a fan of steampunk fantasy Western mashups, we call them weird Westerns, then please pick up a copy of our full cast audiobook, Death of a Bounty Hunter. It's about a desperate sheriff who will do anything to save his daughter, and a bounty hunter who realizes he can no longer run from the truth. A link to deathofabountyhunter.com will be in the description or the show notes. Please support the show by picking up a copy. That is it today. That is it for today's show. Hopefully we'll have a much bigger show to talk about episode 6. If you have a topic or a question you'd like for me to cover, please leave me a comment or shoot me an email at hi@reclamationsociety.org. I'd love to include your questions or topic ideas in a future show. New episodes of the Story Geeks show drop every week, both on YouTube and on your preferred podcast provider. I release content all week long, so I try to release the main show on Wednesdays, but that doesn't always work. So just make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of the content that I'm releasing. You can subscribe on YouTube or on your preferred podcast provider. Thanks for watching. Next week, we will get more into the conclusion of Obi-Wan Kenobi episode 6. And I'm still rewatching all of Stranger Things, and I'm going to do at least one show on season 4, and maybe all of it came before it as well. Stay tuned for all of that, and I will see you on the next show.